Good morning everyone and welcome back to Generic Garage. On today's episode, we're gonna get some more work done on the Shogun, but before we get started, I need to cover everything that I've been working on over the past couple months. When we last left off, we had the car running and we had taken a test drive around the neighborhood, but we were experiencing a few issues and there was still some work to be done before I could take it outside the neighborhood. First things first were the brakes. When I went around the neighborhood, I had mentioned that the brakes were pretty sloppy and the pedal was going to the floor and it didn't feel very good. I mean, it was stopping, but it wasn't stopping like it should. So I started investigating and it turns out that what had happened is whoever had the show before me had installed the wrong hub on the front of the car. So what you can see here is on this one you have one solid diameter pretty much all the way down, and over here on this one that was installed, it kind of kicks out a little bit. They had the wrong diameter on the outside of the centric, and when I put new disc brakes on this thing, the disc wouldn't sit down all the way flush against this face here. It was getting hung up on the bigger centric. When I looked at the old brakes, somebody had actually wallered out the center of the brake disc so that it would fit around that centric, which is why I didn't really notice that that was the wrong one. I got a brand new set of hubs for the rear, put those on, installed the brake discs, and then everything just kind of worked itself out. So essentially with that brake disc sitting so far out, whenever the caliper would try to close in around this, it would actually just kind of pull the disc towards this surface and not actually provide enough gripping force. It was more like rotating the disc or pulling the disc inward towards the engine, and so it would never fully be able to grab like it was supposed to. It was just kind of floating in there. So the brakes on this thing are actually working much better. I would say pretty much perfectly. I can lock up these brakes. There is no anti-lock brake setup on this thing. The car really wants to stop when you put on the brakes. The pedal's not going to the floor. The power brakes work great. I have no complaints. So that's completely fixed. The next big issue that I was having that I might not have mentioned in the previous episode because I hadn't taken it over any big bumps or anything, I went over a speed bump. I noticed that the front was actually bottoming out the suspension, and it took me a minute to figure out what was going on, but I'll put up a picture or two here. Here's what's going on in the rear, and this is exactly what's going on in the front. You can see I have a really big gap here, so this is a lot of suspension travel, but up in the front, this was sitting like way up here, and I only had about an inch of travel. So essentially what I had to do was cut off this metal ring down here, and then cut off a section of the aluminum coilover screw thing here, and then shove the entire shock further down into the knuckle to be able to get a lot more clearance in the front and a lot more travel. So we're probably actually going to end up having to do that here on the rear, where I take off this metal plate that's in here and I chop this a little bit shorter because we're actually going to need some more travel out of these rears. When I put the car down, this is going to shrink up and I'm gonna have the same issue in the rear. So we'll probably have to do that same mod back here and then actually redo some of the suspension stuff, but we'll get into that later. The only place I'm actually bottoming out now in the front is the wheel hitting the fender, which is something we're gonna start working on here really soon. Next up, I got the AC working. So I figured out all the different ends of all the hoses that I would need for every single one of these connectors. Bought all those, bought a bunch of different lengths of hose in different sizes, got everything kind of put in place and run all the way to the back where the compressor is. Once I had my hoses laid out, I took everything up the road to Austin Hose and had them crimp the ends on, and then put everything together, did some work making sure that I had the lines held up underneath the car. Once everything was sorted out, I filled up the system with refrigerant. Everything seemed to be going okay until I was just idling the car one day and I shut it off and it was sitting in the garage here. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, one of the ends back at the compressor blew out and just started leaking all the Freon and the UV dye everywhere, and it made a huge mess. Essentially, I just had to take that one specific hose off and take it back up to Austin Hose and tell them, hey, it wasn't crimped tight enough. So they re-crimped the hoses for me, put everything back on there, refilled the system. The trinary switch is hooked up to keep it from getting too low in pressure and to keep it from getting too high in pressure. And all that seems to be working fine. The only thing that I'm kind of struggling with is the thermostat that's sitting inside the evaporator. It kept wanting to click on and click off pretty quickly. So I might need to get a new one of those or change something about it. It gets cold and it will ice up. So I gotta do something to prevent it from icing up. And I thought the trinary switch would do that, but that doesn't seem to be the case. However, for now, in summer, when it's 90 degrees out, I blast the AC and it actually stays cool inside the cab, which kind of leads to the next thing. That would be that the rear panels have been sorted for the most part. Everything has been created. I made templates again out of RAM board and got everything fit in here. I still need to weld a couple various tabs on with those threaded inserts because right now I'm only holding it on like one back here. There's the two up there. This panel's held on here and here, but I need to do something here and here. This deck lid is hinged at the front with a big piano hinge. There is voided space in the back, and then we have this insulation stuff that I got from Speedway Motors, and that's held on with the plastic retainers like you would see underneath the hood of another car. And this is how I've been kind of holding that up with these like chains that I can just pull on and off through these holes, which are actually there just to clear these bolts. I need to drill some holes here and here and weld, well, maybe not weld, but stick some threaded inserts through here and here so that I can have some sort of wing nuts or something to tie the deck lid down so that when I'm driving, the deck lid doesn't try to flop up and down. If you open the windows going down the road, the deck lid will actually start to float up and bang and kind of do this and hit against this while you're going down the road. So I keep the windows closed for now. But that's something we got to get sorted out as a way to hold that deck lid down. This insulation works really well. I need to put some more on the side panels, and you can see that I've got a bunch on that back firewall panel. That's working out pretty good. Here's how it looks with the deck lid closed. I took this insulation padding from the Ford Taurus under the hood of that thing and kind of laid it back here. Underneath that I have the Amazon Basics sound deadener, and I need to kind of put that everywhere else on the car to help the droning that comes from the exhaust and the engine when I'm going down the road in this thing. But it's not too bad. There is a bit of a whistle from the intake when the AC is on, and that gets a little annoying. You kind of hear everything from the engine and the exhaust and the road through all the holes that run up along the side of the vehicle and go around that firewall. And until I make some panels to close up all those holes, I just kind of have to live with it for now. But it's not too bad. So this is all working out just fine. AC works great. I do not have the heater hooked up yet, and that shouldn't be too difficult. It's just those two ports right there. One's in and one's out for the coolant, and we'll just run those down to the aluminum tubes. I did still have a pretty big oil leak when I got everything back together. I thought I was solving that when I did the pan gasket and the gasket on the rear and whatever gaskets I did on the front. But apparently it was leaking from the crankshaft seal at the front of the engine, which would be on the passenger side, and the camshaft seals. So I took all that timing cover stuff off again and took all of the little sprockets off, pulled all of the seals out from all the camshaft stuff and the crankshaft, replaced all those seals and put everything back together. And that solved the majority of it, but there is still one little leak coming from the low oil level sensor on the bottom of the oil pan. So I probably need to find a replacement seal for that or a different bung or whatever. It's very, very slow. We're talking like 1 or 2 drips a day at most. In fact, I would say maybe a drip every other day. I did take the car out on, like I said, on the highway. I've taken the car to cruise night at Biff Busby's around the corner, which kind of seems to be dying recently, which is kind of sad. But Cars and Coffee started up again out at SeaWorld, and I went to the first one that they did out there, and 2-0 Performance here in San Antonio is hosting all that. And that was a massive turnout. They filled out the entire parking lot. So I had the Shogun out there, and I was getting swarmed the entire time I was out there by people asking questions. In fact, I think the #1 question was, Does it do wheelies? No, it does not. Majority of the weight of the vehicle is actually in front of the rear axle. And while it may pick the car up a little bit and kind of mess with the steering a bit, no, it doesn't do wheelies. It's just a little difficult to control. That being said, when I had gone to cruise night and gotten it up on the highway, this thing was pretty much impossible to control above 45 miles an hour. So I took the car over to a buddy's shop that he goes to and got a 4-wheel alignment done on this thing. Everything was relatively close, but not close enough. So the alignment's been done on the car and it handles much better now, but because of the short wheelbase, it is kind of a white knuckle ride. You feel everything from the road, and the car itself wants to sway a little bit left and right. When you get on it, because that rear differential is not a limited slip, you get a little bit of torque steer from the rear end. It wants to push the car left or right, depending on the angle of the road. And then when you let off the gas, it wants to self-correct, and you feel yourself trying to correct on the steering wheel, and that kind of makes you do this little back and forth thing until it stabilizes. And then of course, because the car is sitting so high up, it does this like floating thing when you get up to about 75, 80 miles an hour, and you're not really sure if the car is being controlled by you or if you are being controlled by the car. Who's steering? I have no idea. The car's steering a little bit and I'm steering a little bit, and together we're kind of just making it down the highway. So I'm not going above 70 on the highway. It feels fine at 70, and we'll leave it at that for now. I have taken it out to a couple more events, such as Slow Sunday. Here's some clips of Slow Sunday that I had never heard of at a State Coffee here in San Antonio. It's pretty dope. They had a bunch of different cars show up for that I haven't seen before, and I met a bunch of people that were interested in the car. And again, just like at SeaWorld, I get swarmed when I'm out there. I barely get a chance to walk around and check out all the other cars that show up, but it's still a really, really cool event, and the car's getting a lot of attention, which is great. On the inside of the car, I did get a stereo installed. This is the Power Acoustic Android Auto-enabled touchscreen thing from Walmart. It actually works out really well, and it's paired with some speakers that are in here. And to be honest, that whole thing sucks. I need to get some speakers in the doors and speakers in the back and some subwoofers and all that, but we'll do that much later on. I got a new dome light, and that dome light's actually from the Mazda B2200 and 2600 trucks. So if you're looking for a new dome light for your Festiva, jump on eBay and look for the Mazda dome light from a B2200 or a B2600. That's pretty nice. The fuel pump started making a bunch of noise, and that fuel pump I actually replaced with a Bosch fuel pump. And well, it turns out the reason that this one died is because we did suck up a bunch of debris from the tank. Here's a picture of the filters, and honestly, I've kind of flushed them through a couple of times now and put new filters in there. But that new Bosch fuel pump is making a bunch of noise now. It's pretty dang loud, so I probably need to take those filters out again and check and see what's going on. Hopefully I haven't destroyed that Bosch fuel pump. I might go through another fuel pump or two. I probably should have just sprung for the new gas tank instead of trying to reuse this one, because that would have saved me some money, and we wouldn't be having fuel pump issues. Some of you may notice that the fuel pressure regulator is no longer sitting up here in the front, and that is because the regulator has been moved to the back here. I had originally left the pressure regulator on the fuel rail that was stock from the show, and when I had that one in combination with the stock one, they were sitting there kind of fighting each other, or something weird was going on. But when you look at that gauge would sit there and it would just be fluttering back and forth. So it was like one pressure regulator was messing with another pressure regulator, and it just wasn't working. So I removed the pressure regulator from the show motor, and everything's just running off of that pressure regulator, and it seems to be much happier with that now. It's got a vacuum hose on it so that it can adjust the pressure down when it's at idle, and then of course it picks it up to where it needs to be when it's off idle, and all that's working just fine. The last big update I have is that I have finally ordered the wheels. They're going to be forged monoblocks. They're coming from SP2. Here's a render of what they're going to look like. If you recognize them, you know that they're from a Mustang in the 70s, mid-70s, I believe. They're the King Cobra wheels that you would have found on one specific year of the Mustang. I talked to a couple of guys out at the SeaWorld car meet at Cars and Coffee, and they were telling me that if you jump on Alibaba, you can actually order wheels from China for like 1,800 bucks, and those are still gonna be those forged monoblock wheels, not some cast wheels or some flow forged wheels, but actual monoblock wheels. So I did some research and I found out that there's a company called PWC, which is Precision Wheel Components Co. Ltd, based in China, and they actually had a booth at a SEMA show a couple of years back. And I have a sneaking suspicion that most of the wheels from these big companies in America, they're actually coming from PWC or another company over in China that's pretty well known for doing this sort of work. I do not believe these things are being manufactured in the United States. I don't think you could get the material, do all of the machine work, do the powder coating, and do all the shipping for the $3,000 or so that I paid for the set of wheels that are coming from SP2. I'm not gonna have the SP2 logo on the center caps. I did find a company called Zen Graphics in the UK, and they have the original vector files for the Shogun logo. They did not wanna sell me the vector files, so I ordered some pretty big vinyl stickers of that logo, and I have a scanner and I scanned it and I made my own vector files, and then I sent that over to SP2. So hopefully he's going to use those vector graphics to engrave on the center caps, and we'll have some pretty nice wheels. Again, those are going to be 8.5 wide in the front and 10-inch wide in the back, 17 inches in diameter. With those wheels being ordered probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago, we still have a couple weeks to go. It'll put them here sometime after the beginning of the year. But until they get here, we need to do some prep work on the car. So let's talk about what we're gonna actually work on today. We need to start modifying the body panels. And by that I mean, I need to start cutting out these fender wells to be able to fit the wheels and to lower the car down. Now, you can see right now with a laser level setup that the car is actually kind of raked forward a bit, meaning it's raked down in the front, and that is not the way the car should be sitting. Beyond that, the car is sitting up way too high, and I have it set up like that right now so that we can drive the car around without rubbing the wheels on the fenders. But what I've also done is a mock-up inside of Fusion 360. I've scaled the side profile of the Shogun to a 91-inch wheelbase from the center of the front wheel to the center of the back wheel, and done a couple measurements on the car to verify everything is correct in my drawing here. And there's a couple of things we should take note of. The first thing that I want to note is that the car is sitting pretty much level. It's actually kind of raked towards the back end, probably about 1/2 degree. So this line represents the bottom of that door line. And you'll notice that the bottom of the door line is sitting well below the center of the rear axle. And it's slightly less at the front axle. So if I take a quick measurement back here from the center of the wheel to the bottom of the door line, it looks like we're seeing a difference of about 1 3/4 inch. So the door line needs to sit below the rear axle about 1 3/4 inch, and the front needs to sit above that line about 0.7 inches. So we need to adjust the car and the suspension of the front and the rear to kind of match what's going on here. And what's going to happen is once I start trying to drop the car down, at some point the fender is going to run into the tire and we're not going to be able to drop it down anymore. So what I want to do is probably take the wheels off of the car, and that way we have the center point of the hub and we can get the axles sitting where they need to be relative to the bottom of this door line. And then we can start to plan for about 2 or 3 inches of drop beyond that, meaning we're gonna have to bring up those axles about another 2 or 3 inches. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take the rear wheels off of the car, and I also need to remove the springs so we're not having to fight against those when we're moving the axles up and down. Once I've done that, I'm gonna level out the car with the bottom of the door line being level to the laser so that I have the reference that I need to know how far up I need to pick up those rear axles. We'll pick up the rear axles about 1 3/4 inches, which is our kind of base starting point. And then I need to go another 2 or 3 inches beyond that because that's the amount that the suspension is gonna wanna compress at its maximum when we go over any bumps. Once we have that center of the axle picked up, the 1 3/4 plus about 2 or 3 inches, then we can use that center point of the axle to mark on the fenders where we need to cut with a nice big radius that'll clear the wheels. Then we can cut that all out, and then we can start reinforcing everything that we removed from the underside of the fender with a bunch of sheet metal, and then hopefully we should be able to put everything back together and drop the car down and adjust the springs and the suspension where it needs to be to sit at a 1 3/4 inch above the door line in the rear axles. And this might get a little hairy because I'm probably going to have to, like I said, modify the suspension in the rear again, and hopefully we can actually get that 2 to 3 inch travel that I'm talking about beyond the 1 3/4 above the bottom of the door line, because if I can't, we have to start doing some heavy modifications to the rear suspension, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. For now, let's get started doing everything I just said I needed to do. Alrighty, well, I've got a couple of the lights turned off here in the garage so that we can see the laser a little bit better. I've got the car up on 4 jack stands and it's leveled front to back and left to right relative to the bottom of the door frame there. As you can see here, I've also jacked up the rear axles such that the center point of the wheel is about 1 3/4 inches above that laser line. Right off the bat, our camber is way off. We are sitting, it's saying here, about 85.5 degrees, which means we are tilted in about 4.5 degrees that way. Another issue that you'll notice pretty much right away is we are at the top or bottom, however you want to look at it, of our shock travel. The spring would sit in here and here, but that's all the space we would have. There's one more really big issue, and that is the angle of the McPherson strut suspension geometry. The lower control arm is sitting at an upward angle, the CV axle is sitting at an upward angle, the tie rod is sitting at an upward angle. Everything's at an upward angle, and McPherson strut suspension, that's kind of a no-go. You want it ideally a little bit below horizontal level, and at worst, like completely horizontal. What's gonna happen here is we're gonna start binding things up. We're gonna start messing with the way our camber is affected, and we're probably actually gonna start having issues with bump steer, but in the rear end, which is very bad. So that can only really mean one thing, and I just checked for it, and it kinda checks out. With the vehicle being level, we should see the bottom of the oil pan being level. I put one of these magnetic degree level indicators on a piece of metal that is parallel with the bottom of the oil pan. And you can see here it's saying that we're rotated clockwise about 2 degrees. So that means that the engine itself, relative to the oil pan anyways, is not sitting quite level to the car. So what we need to do is rotate the whole subframe counterclockwise about 2 degrees, maybe even 3 degrees. And when we look at the mounting point for where the subframe mounts, which is on that bolt and the bolt way over there on the other side, and we measure from there all the way back to the CV axle here, what I find is there's about 24 inches from here all the way to that bolt. And 2 degrees over a 24-inch span is about 7/8 of an inch. And then we have some amount of space, probably close to about a foot, 1.5 feet from the CV axle here to the mount point of the subframe in the rear. So that's going to be an even longer span, basically from the front of the subframe to the back of the subframe, 2 degrees being rotated up. Essentially what that means is, like I said in a video a long time ago when we were first building this roll cage, this tube is sticking down too far. I probably need to come in here and cut about 1.5 inches or so out of these tubes on this side and that side so that we can rotate the whole subframe counterclockwise, bringing everything in the rear up, which will bring the engine up, which will mean that if this sits exactly where it is, not moving at all, and the engine moves up, all of the control arms and tie rod ends and everything else that's sitting at an upward angle should start to drop as the engine comes up. So that's one potential solution to some of this issue that we're having here. I said I was gonna slot these holes outward, but even putting the strut all the way to the edge here does not fix the camber issue that we're running into. I need it still to come out even further than that. So that kind of tells me that even though I don't want to, I'm pretty sure we're gonna have to cut off the 3 tubes on both sides, isolate these plates, and kind of redo the suspension. I don't know of any other way to fix this. I believe this plate probably needs to come up a little bit higher because, again, we want some more travel out of the suspension. So we're gonna be doing a lot more work than I anticipated, and we're gonna be redoing some of the work that I had done when I first set up this roll cage. But that's just kind of how these things go. About another week has gone by since I did all that work that you just saw. I needed to order some parts, and here's kind of a rundown of what's going on. Just a quick update. These are Camber caster plates for a mid to late 90s Mustang. They will allow me to adjust the camber and the caster once I've got them situated kind of where they need to be. So we have to get relatively close to where the suspension needs to be set up, but at least those will allow me some adjustment. The center hole for the spherical bearing is 18 millimeters, and the damper rod threaded end of the strut is 14 millimeters. They send these little adapters in the kit, but that only gets you to 16, so I had to then go and 3D print these little 16 to 14 millimeter adapters, and they're made out of ABS, and I hope they hold up. They might get hot and start to melt in there. We may have to make these out of something a little bit more substantial later on. And then with that all on there, we can stick our camber caster plate right there. And again, that gives us a little bit of movement left and right and front and back, so we can do some adjustment. That being said, it didn't leave me enough room to use these nylock nuts, because the threaded part of that rod doesn't actually reach the nylock part. So I ordered a bunch of different nuts off of Amazon. I'm still waiting for some to get here, but they should be here today. These have locking sections on the bottom, but there's a couple others coming in the mail that we might try. It'll end up looking something like that. And then we just gotta jack up the axles, get them where they need to be. Then we need to kind of design a plate to sit in between the bottom and the top plate here, and it'll get sandwiched with the 4 bolts. And then we'll weld it between this plate here and the roll cage tubes over here. I've cleaned these up a little bit, but I didn't want to spend so much time grinding on them and trying to get these perfectly smoothed out. You'll never really see them anyways. So the point of the 3 measuring tapes is that this is where, when we're sitting at neutral ride height, the axle should be the center of the hub. This represents 3 inches of compression, with the wheel going up 3 inches and compressing the suspension. And then this one up here represents the outer diameter of the wheel at its top height, plus an extra 1/2 inch for clearance of where we need to start kind of cutting our radius out of the back of the Shogun here. It turns out that these windows come out pretty easily. There's a screw here, a screw here, and a screw up here, and then the whole glass just kind of comes out. So I got that sitting in the front seat on both sides so we can kind of work in here, which is really nice. I wish I had done that a lot sooner. And of course, when I did that, all of the little rubber washers that are in there to help seal it up broke, so we got some new rubber washers off eBay. I have no idea what I'm doing, guys. I don't know how any of this is gonna go together. We're making this up as we go, and hopefully we can kind of get it figured out. And then having the adjustability in the camber caster plates leaves us a little bit of room for not being perfect this time. I think I pretty much got all of that figured out. I've got everything burned in, welded up. I might go back and add some gussets in a little bit. For now, what I'd like to move on to is cutting out these fenders. So here's what I did for that. With the help of Fusion 360 and my 3D printer, I was able to make a couple of tools to help me mark out exactly where I want to cut the fenders on the back of the car. The black plate mounts just like a wheel does, and then the green plate mounts to the black plate. There's a specific distance between the center of the wheel and this hole, which holds this Sharpie. And then I can rotate this around, and that lets me mark out exactly where I want to cut the fender. The distance here is going to be half of the wheel diameter, which at max should be about 25.2 inches. And I'm talking about the actual tire itself when it's inflated. And then another 1/2 inch, of course, for clearance. So from here to that hole is 13.1 inches. And then of course the axle is jacked up 3 inches above the neutral ride height. So this is actually what it looks like when the wheel will be sitting at its maximum compression for the suspension. At some point towards the bottom here, that arch starts to kind of curve back in. And so what I'm gonna do is just draw a straight line from the outermost part of the circle there, straight down, and I'll do that on the back and the front, which will give us kind of a straight point to cut straight up and then arch and then straight down, so we don't have this weird like arch that kind of curves back in. I'm kind of nervous. There's no going back once I start doing this, and so hopefully everything kind of goes all right. I still have to figure out how to cut the inside sheet metal and make marks relative to the marks on the outside, such that like it's pretty much just a straight shot all the way through, and then I can weld up some sheet metal onto that. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Alrighty, well, we got a lot of work done. This took me another week or two. I actually started filming this well before Christmas, and I intended to get the video out before the end of the year, but unfortunately circumstances, broken tools, things of that nature kept me from getting it done. However, we have now got inner wheel arches on the Festiva. This took me a little bit to figure out. We bought a slip roller from Eastwood. We got that sheet metal cut up and we got it all installed. The driver's side of the car was the first side to get done, and I kind of forgot that you need to move around and give it more time when you're welding long beads. And this side definitely isn't perfect. You can see it kind of wrinkled some of the rear fender back here as I was welding it. But I learned from my mistakes on this side, and the other side came out a lot cleaner. Thankfully, you're never actually gonna be able to see these unless you poke your head into the body kit, because the body kit's gonna be covering up these inner arches. So now all we're waiting on is for those wheels to get here, and that'll be in the next episode. I'm gonna go ahead and wait for the next episode until those come in, and then we'll start working on the front fenders, because we gotta get those flared out somehow, or cut up, or do something so that it's drivable for right now. And then I can take the 3D scanner and I can scan the whole car, and I can start working on the design of the body kit. There's a couple few things that need to be massaged. This panel no longer goes back in. The distance left to right somehow shrank up, and I guess it's because I took those other plates out that held the shocks before. This doesn't exactly fit correctly. These holes don't line up perfectly like they should, so I gotta massage that. Gotta put the windows back in. Got a few more other things to wrap up, like cutting the bumper and put the bumper back on, but I'm gonna go ahead and take care of that off camera. So for now, thank you everyone for your patience. I really appreciate you watching. If you want to continue to see this project, please consider subscribing. I don't even know 800 people, but 800 of y'all are subscribed. I haven't looked at my metrics to see how many of you are watching and not subscribed, but do me a favor, it's free, and I don't put out a lot of videos, so I'm not gonna clutter up your homepage on YouTube. You'll see these videos pop up every couple months, and it's just as I make progress on the car. So thanks again, I really appreciate it, guys. I hope y'all had a great Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I will catch you on the next episode. Until then, take care, bye.